This is Sunrise speaking. If you find Earth Bowen, if it's the same old same thing, come on and sign up for Outer Spaceways Incorporated. WCBN, FM Ann Arbor.
Astro-black mythology, astro-timeless immortality.
The Duke is on the air.
This afternoon we've got a swell program for you during the next 58 minutes or so lend us your ears, and first we're going to hear Caravan, an original with a little Spanish tempo to it. All right, Duke? Gentlemen, Duke Ellington's Caravan. It's your Saturday afternoon date with the Duke and his orchestra, coming to you from New York. Here's a pretty little thing. It's sort of new, too. I think you're going to like it. It's called Fickle Fling.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled program to bring you a special bulletin. President Truman has just announced the appointment of James F. Burns as United States Secretary of State, succeeding Edward R. Stettinius, Jr. We return you now to our regularly scheduled program.
Good afternoon, Ann Arbor. This is Dave Crippen with Michael Poole and the Duke Ellington Show on WCBN every Sunday afternoon from 5 to 6. We've just heard a marvelous new version of Caravan, which is a favorite from the mid-'30s and has been played by Ellington these next 10 years. This is we're listening today from those marvelous Treasury air shots from 1945, 46, and you just heard an authentic cut-in announcing a Truman appointment of, who was it, a defense chief? Do you remember what it was?
I don't know, Secretary of State or something.
No, Secretary of Defense, I think, yeah. In any event...
Secretary of War.
Well, no, the war's over. In any event, they're restructuring the Defense Department about this time, and these marvelous shows were coming out of the Treasury, the last gasp of the Treasury bond program. They were gearing up for a victory program because once the war was over, they didn't have justification for war bonds. But we don't get Duke's marvelous commercials for the Treasury Department on this particular series that we have. These were done by Mel Torme for his own private use and released to Fairmont Records about it's been about 5 years now, I think, since they were out, or more. In any event, we've got a great afternoon coming up, and we've just listened to Caravan, which was a new version, which was just about to re-record on Victor, and then we heard a delightful jump tune called Fickle Fling. I think we'll go straight through on this side, Michael. We'll hear a great jam session on Honeysuckle Rose coming up next. And then we'll hear a gorgeous Johnny Hodges Strayhorn tune. That is to say, a Strayhorn tune done by Johnny Hodges called Daydream. Johnny Hodges on the alto sax. Then we'll hear a tribute to Count Basie, who was a great friend of Duke Ellington's, his theme song, 1 O'Clock Jump, and then yet another Strayhorn, a beautiful tune called Chelsea Bridge, very impressionistic, named after, I think, a Turner painting. And finally, a really a tune that Ellington has been associated with for many years called I Want Something to Live For. So Duke Ellington in mid-1945.
You know, friends, one of the greatest old tunes that you'll find in any orchestra's books is Honeysuckle Rose. So here it is, and Jimmy Hamilton with his clarinet, Honeysuckle Rose. The American Broadcasting Company is sending you coast to coast the music of Duke Ellington and his celebrated orchestra. You know, when they talk of alto saxophone players, well, Johnny Hodges' name is always up there amongst the Big Ten. So here he is, and it's Daydream. it's a little bit on the tepid side in New York this afternoon, boys and girls, so don't get too excited about this tune because it's really a humdinger. Here's the Duke's own version of the 1 o'clock jump.
a swinging version of 1 O'Clock Jump. Before we get into these next two, I wanted to mention this sort of a mini Strayhorn festival here today, where we listen to Daydream, and we'll hear the marvelous Chelsea Bridge, and then finally Something to Live For, which was one of Strayhorn's earliest arrangements.
Strayhorn is our special guest this afternoon.
someone to make my life an adventurous dream. Oh, what wouldn't I give for someone who'd take my life and make it seem gay as they say it ought to be. Why can't I have love like that brought to me? My eye is watching the noon crowd, searching the promenade, seeking a clue to the one who will someday be mine, something to live for.
Well, that was a gorgeous version, two gorgeous versions of Strayhorn pieces. One called Chelsea Bridge, of course, the famous one, and probably the best extended version of that I've heard. It ran about, yes, it ran about 5 minutes, I think. Then we heard, of course, Kay Davis singing "Something to Live For," which was also a Strayhorn composition, and was, as I mentioned earlier, the first arrangement he did for Ellington in 1939. Okay, we flipped. You're right. My Little Brown Book by Strayhorn, and a great ballad, I think, sung by Al Hibbler on this. It used to be. He inherited that when he joined the band, and then we'll hear a rather odd little novelty sung by Ray Nance called "Otto, Make That Riff Staccato."
Little brown book with a silver binding, how it keeps reminding me of a memory that's haunting me in some quiet nook. I go through its pages and peruse this ageless tale of a love that failed to ever become true. On this page is the date of that fateful night at 8 when I found we were no longer in love. After that, there's nothing more, just a dark and beautiful door that shuts out the stars above. In my little book, I I inscribe your heart love. But since we're apart now, this and that last sweet kiss is all that's left of you. Is all that's left of Here's a little tune that I mentioned a while ago, but we didn't get a chance to do it right then. Ray Nance is going to sing Riff Staccato.
Choppy is the motto. Play a hot staccato. Otto, make a brief staccato. Start an obligato. No ad-lib vibrato. Tone, drag us with your corny lips. You're strictly on it, nowhere, kid. Otto, lose that old legato. We're not playing lotto. Make a brief staccato.
Okay, that was Otto, Make That Riff Staccato, which was sung with great panache by by Ray Nance. We're going to hear now two fine Ellington compositions. One, Carnegie Blues, which is a very slow and very moving kind of blues with Al Sears on tenor sax. He was also on Otto. And then we'll hear an interesting rarity from the mid-30s entitled Old King Dooji.
Well, friends, the American Broadcasting Company is bringing you this music coast to coast, and of course it's none other than Duke Ellington's music. And now here's one from the Black, Brown, and Beige suite, one of Duke's originals, a very lovely thing called Carnegie Blues. Well, Duke, it's getting along towards closing time now, and we still have another selection. You know, friends, this afternoon before broadcast time, I asked the Duke what this new tune was all about. I'd never seen or heard of it before, and he says, just tell him it's absolutely mad. So, Old King Dooji is absolutely mad.
It was a quick ending. That was a really great version of a mid 1930s favorite, or late 1930s favorite, called "Old King Dooji Wooji." And before that, we heard the really very affecting Carnegie Blues, done by Al Sears and Lawrence Brown. We're now going to listen to the last two on this cut, on this side, the Bluebells of Harlem, which was commissioned supposedly by Paul Whiteman,
King of Jazz.
the King of Jazz, right? Paul was on his last legs at this point, and then we'll hear one of Ellington's certified hits from this era, called "I'm Beginning to See the Light," and I think it'll be Joya Sherrill on the vocal.
Duke Ellington and his celebrated orchestra coming to you this afternoon from Radio City in New York. probably know, this is your Saturday afternoon date with the Duke. You know, one of the shining lights in Duke's orchestra is Joya Sherrill, a very lovely girl. She's going to sing for you now a very popular tune. And all of us are beginning to see the light.
A neat version of I'm Beginning to See the Light, which was, you're right, Michael, it was Johnny Hodges' vehicle from the late 30s as an instrumental, and was recycled with new with words in the mid 40s, and became an instant hit with Joya Sherrill's jumping vocal rendition. Well, we want to tell you that this is the Duke Ellington Hour with Dave Crippen and Michael Poole on WCBN.
FM Ann Arbor.
FM Ann Arbor. And we'll be with you as always. That is to say, I will not be here next week, but Michael will be taking the show over. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. And to sort of take you out to the end of the show, a rather energetic version, especially the announcer, of
always
of the marvelous title tune from Duke's hip musical of the early 40s, Jump for Joy, with a great vocal by Nance. See you next week.
Here now is the boys. What's solid stuff? What's solid stuff with Ray Vance doing the vocal on Jump for Joy.
style, honey child, jump joy. Now don't you grieve, little Eve, all the hounds I do have been killed. Now won't you feel jump joy? Have you seen pastures groovy? Telling you green pastures was just a technique of the booty. When you get up to heaven and you meet old St. Pete, feel that ball jump joy. Step right in, give Pete some skin, jump joy.
This is Dewey Redman saying that if you don't listen to WCBN FM in Arbor, then you are definitely missing something, and that something could be vital to your life. So listen to WCBN Radio.
Well, good evening and welcome to Real Black Miracles. My name is Arwulf, and this evening we're covering Sun Ra, or we're going to let Sun Ra cover us, I should say. I have some rather uncommon Ra that has been loaned to me by a gentleman out of the Ann Arbor community. We'd like to thank him. We're going to start with the A Train to take us out of the land of Duke Ellington and into whatever realm Sun Ra wants to drag us. It should be pretty interesting. I've been monitoring a lot of this stuff, and it's very peculiar music, so be ready for a lot of Moog synthesizers and some ferocious saxophone from the legendary Sun Ra saxophone section, Pat Patrick, John Gilmore, and Marshall Allen. So stay tuned. I think Ra's going to start us off with some piano. This is a live recording. Sun Ra and the Orchestra.